My name is Vance Hollister, and at 49 years old, I had spent over 2 decades in international corporate logistics. For the past 4 years, I served as the Senior Director of Asian Operations at Apex Global Logistics. When I first inherited the division, it had only 4 struggling regional accounts, generating minimal revenue. Through relentless travel, late-night negotiations, and deep cultural immersion, I built that division from 4 accounts into 58 high-volume corporate clients. Beyond my day-to-day managerial duties, I was also an independent scholar of international trade law and intellectual property. Years prior, I had authored and registered a specialized corporate negotiation software algorithm and cultural translation matrix under my personal limited liability company. That system was legally protected under Title 17 United States Code, Section 106 for copyright, and Title 35 United States Code Section 271 for patent architecture. Apex Global Logistics utilized my software under a revocable, non-transferable personal license tied directly to my continued employment contract. Despite my substantial executive compensation, I maintained a modest personal routine. 6 months ago, locking to fund a private foundation for trade law scholarships, I registered under my middle name on an elite executive consulting platform. I accepted a private tutoring position, offering $450 per session, twice a week. At $900 weekly, the engagement totaled $21,600 across 6 months. The client listed on the portal was simply identified as Beverly, residing in a gated estate in the Hill Districts. The contractual terms demanded absolute discretion, non-disclosure, and remote or private home instruction. When I first met Beverly at her sprawling mansion, I wore heavy tortoise-shell reading glasses, combed my hair flat, and dressed in understated tweed jackets. Looking entirely unlike the tailored executive who managed 58 global corporate accounts, from our very first session, Beverly made her attitude abundantly clear. She did not greet me with standard courtesy. Instead, she stood beside her imported marble fireplace and announced that she required complete executive-level fluency in Mandarin Chinese within 6 months. She claimed she was spearheading an enterprise joint venture worth $75 million with major industrial partners from Beijing. She boasted that everyone in her social circle believed she was a natural linguistic prodigy. However, within 15 minutes of diagnostic assessment, the truth became painfully obvious. Beverly possessed virtually zero linguistic capability. She could not distinguish basic tonal inflections, mixed up fundamental honorifics, and possessed no grasp of Chinese commercial regulations. Whenever I corrected her pronunciation, Beverly reacted with sharp irritation. She treated me as nothing more than a glorified servant, ordering me to fetch her sparkling water and insisting that I enter her property through the rear service door so the security guards would not see tutors using the main entrance. I swallowed my professional pride because the contract was legally binding and the extra income directly funded my scholarship endowment. Over those 6 months, I meticulously documented every instructional session using high-definition audio-visual recording tools as permitted under the consulting platform's standard auditing protocols. As the months progressed, Beverly's vanity grew increasingly unhinged. She refused to study real grammar or underlying vocabulary. Instead, she demanded that I draft phonetically transcribed scripts for her upcoming $75 million presentation. I essentially wrote her entire presentation in English phonetics, color-coding key phrases so she could recite them like a theater actor, without understanding a single word of underlying grammar. I explicitly warned her that reciting a static script was extremely risky, because if foreign corporate executives asked an unscripted question regarding supply chain logistics or legal compliance, her complete lack of comprehension would immediately collapse the illusion. She brushed my warnings aside with arrogant laughter, declaring that her charm and confidence would carry the deal. 2 weeks before the scheduled presentation, Beverly proudly mentioned that she would be attending the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, a high-profile corporate evening where the city's business elite gathered. My heart sank slightly during that lesson because Apex Global Logistics was a primary corporate sponsor of the gala, and as senior director, I was mandated to attend alongside our executive committee. However, since Beverly had only ever seen me in casual tweed, heavy glasses, and flat hair, and since I would be wearing a formal tuxedo, styled hair, and contact lenses, I presumed our paths would never cross in any meaningful way. The evening of the gala was magnificent. Our corporate table was positioned near the main stage. Halfway through the dinner, I observed Beverly across the ballroom, wearing a jewel-encrusted evening gown and animatedly holding court at the head table alongside our company's chief executive officer, Julian Prescott. That was the exact moment I realized the horrifying connection. Beverly was Beverly Prescott, the wife of my CEO. I remained discreetly at my table, focusing on conversations with our regional trade officers. Near the conclusion of the main course, I stood up to grab a sparkling water from the beverage bar. As I returned, Beverly walked down the main aisle, surrounded by an entourage of local socialites. I quietly sat back down at my assigned seat and continued reviewing our quarterly logistics brief on my tablet. One of my associate directors called out my full name, Vance Hollister, from across the table to ask about our maritime shipping rates. I looked up briefly to answer him, and for 2 seconds, Beverly's eyes locked onto mine. A flicker of confusion crossed her face as if she half recognized my eyes, but she swept past without speaking. I assumed the brief encounter was inconsequential. I was entirely wrong. Beverly spent the remainder of the evening obsessing over why a senior corporate director had not stood up, bowed, or fawned over her as she walked down the aisle. In her twisted, entitlement-driven mind, my refusal to jump to my feet and grovel in front of her social peers constituted an unforgivable public insult. The following morning at 7 in the morning, I was sitting quietly at my desk, organizing our international shipping manifests, when my office door was slammed open with violent force. Beverly Prescott stormed into my workspace like an enraged tempest, her heavy diamond rings flashing under the fluorescent lights as she pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. She screamed at the top of her lungs that I had deliberately disrespected her at the charity gala, that I was an arrogant subordinate who did not know his place in the corporate hierarchy, and that she had already commanded her husband to purge me from the corporate payroll before noon. Less than 20 minutes later, Chief Executive Officer Julian Prescott summoned me into the executive boardroom. Julian looked visibly exhausted, his face drawn tight with anxiety and dark circles surrounding his eyes. He refused to look me in the eye as he pushed a formal summary severance document across the polished mahogany conference table. He stated in a flat, defensive tone that while my 4-year record of managing 58 corporate accounts was undeniably flawless, he could not tolerate domestic friction or public drama involving his wife. He offered me 90 days of base salary as severance, provided I surrendered all digital files and departed the corporate premises immediately without contesting the dismissal. I looked down at the severance agreement and let out a calm, deliberate laugh that echoed through the silent boardroom. I asked Julian if he truly intended to dismantle 4 years of hard-won international expansion and jeopardize a $75 million joint venture simply because his wife's fragile ego felt wounded at a charity dinner. Julian snapped back with aggressive frustration, stating that his executive authority was final and that arguing would only make my immediate departure more painful in public. I sat back in the leather chair, calmly adjusted my French cuffs, and looked Julian directly in the eyes. I told him that before he placed his final signature on that termination order, he needed to open his corporate email inbox immediately. I informed him that I had just transmitted a secure digital dossier containing 36 high-definition video archives directly from my private executive consulting portal. Julian frowned with deep irritation, pulled his laptop forward, and clicked on the first video file. His face transformed from arrogant authority to absolute horror in a matter of seconds. On the high-resolution screen, crystal-clear video footage showed his wife, Beverly, sitting in her private study, struggling helplessly to pronounce basic Chinese greetings. The high-fidelity audio captured her pleading with me to write everything in simple English letters because she could not read Chinese characters. followed by her explicit admission that she was deceiving her husband and the board of directors regarding her linguistic abilities for the upcoming $75 million negotiation. As Julian sat frozen and stunned, paralyzed silence, I reached into my leather briefcase, removed my heavy tortoiseshell reading glasses, placed them slowly on my nose, and flattened my hair slightly forward. I looked at him with icy composure and stated that my registered name on the private tutoring contract was Vance Hollister, and that effective immediately, his wife's private instruction was permanently canceled. The silence inside that boardroom was suffocating. Julian stared at the video screen where his wife was clearly recorded, stating that she intended to fake her way through the upcoming international negotiation using memorized phonetic scripts. He whispered under his breath that the Beijing delegation, led by Senior Industrial Representative Mr. Lin and Lead Legal Officer Ms. Zhao, was arriving in exactly 4 days for the final contract execution. He realized with rising horror that if Mr. Lin or Ms. Zhao asked Beverly even a single technical question about supply chain distribution or maritime regulatory compliance, her complete inability to comprehend the language would publicly destroy the company's reputation across Asia. I stood up from my chair and laid out the legal and financial reality for him with surgical precision. First, I explained that Beverly's actions constituted a clear attempted breach of fiduciary duty and corporate misrepresentation under corporate governance law, as she had held herself out as an authorized corporate negotiator while deceiving the executive team. Second, I reminded Julian of the proprietary software license agreement governing our Asian operations. Apex Global Logistics utilized my patented logistics algorithm and copyrighted translation framework under federal intellectual property provisions outlined in Title 17, Section 106, alongside Title 35, Section 271 of the United States Code. That personal license was legally tied to my active employment contract. The exact moment my termination took effect, the software license was automatically revoked, legally prohibiting Apex from using the core system that managed all 58 international accounts. Furthermore, I informed him that summary termination of a senior division head without statutory cause triggered immediate violations of the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act under Title 29 United States Code Section 2101, exposing the board of directors to massive federal statutory penalties, administrative fines, and joint liability for wrongful discharge. Julian slumped back in his leather executive chair, his face drained of all color. He realized with sickening clarity that firing me to appease his wife's vanity would immediately paralyze the company's Asian division, trigger federal intellectual property injunctions, and expose the firm to catastrophic legal liability. He pleaded with me to stay, offering to rip up the termination paper on the spot and double my annual discretionary performance bonus. I picked up my leather briefcase and informed him that I was taking immediate accrued administrative leave. I stated that, until the board of directors conducted a formal review of corporate governance and addressed the unlawful interference of non-executive family members, I would not step foot in the operational facilities. I walked out of the corporate headquarters with calm authority, leaving Julian to face the looming operational disaster alone. Over the next 3 days, my personal phone rang repeatedly with desperate calls and hostile messages. Beverly left several hysterical voicemails, threatening to hire aggressive trial attorneys and sue me for millions of dollars for violating private non-disclosure agreements. I called her back once and calmly explained the legal reality of non-disclosure agreements under state contract law. Confidentiality clauses protect private client information from external third parties, but they never prevent a professional contractor from presenting evidence in self-defense against fraudulent corporate termination, extortion, or malicious interference with business relations. When she realized her legal threats were completely toothless under federal jurisprudence, she slammed the phone down in furious defeat. On the morning of the $75 million contract presentation, I was sitting in my private home office reviewing international market reports when my phone rang at 9 in the morning. It was Chief Executive Officer Julian Prescott. his voice trembling with sheer panic and total exhaustion. He revealed that the Beijing delegation, headed by Senior Industrial Representative Mr. Lin and Lead Legal Counsel Ms. Zhao, had arrived 2 hours early for their scheduled appointment and requested an informal pre-presentation working lunch to review operational details. Julian confessed in a broken, trembling voice that Beverly had locked herself inside the executive restroom in a state of complete hysteria because she could not understand a single word of the informal preliminary discussions. Mr. Lin and Ms. Zhao were growing increasingly suspicious of her bizarre avoidance tactics, her tense posture, and her obvious panic. Julian begged me on his hands and knees to come to headquarters immediately, offering full executive reinstatement, a formal written apology from the executive committee, and complete operational independence over the Asian division. I reminded Julian that I was not interested in saving his wife from the natural consequences of her own deception, but I cared deeply about the 400 dedicated employees in our Asian division whose livelihoods depended on corporate stability. I agreed to attend the afternoon session strictly as an independent senior legal and operational consultant, demanding a signed consulting fee agreement of $50,000 for the afternoon session, payable prior to my arrival. When I entered the Grand Executive Conference Hall 45 minutes later, the atmosphere was dense with palpable tension. The room was outfitted with high-end multimedia screens, international regulatory dossiers, and formal traditional tea arrangements. Beverly was standing near the far corner of the room, looking immaculate in a tailored designer suit, but her hands were visibly shaking as she held a sheaf of papers. When she saw me walk in, wearing my sharp executive suit without glasses, her eyes widened in absolute shock, terror, and deep humiliation. I walked directly to the head of the conference table and greeted Mr. Lin and Ms. Zhao in flawless, formal Mandarin Chinese, adhering strictly to traditional business etiquette and customary honorifics. Mr. Lin's face brightened immediately, and Ms. Zhao smiled warmly as we engaged in a sophisticated discussion regarding international trade compliance, deepwater port logistics, and regional tariffs across Asian shipping corridors. We discussed macroeconomic trends, vessel routing, customs clearance procedures, and maritime security protocols with fluid precision and professional ease. I presented a high-level briefing on our proprietary route optimization matrix, demonstrating how our international division maintained zero shipping delays across 58 major trade accounts over the past 4 years. Mr. Lin nodded with deep approval, noting that our analytical rigor was precisely why their Beijing industrial group sought an exclusive American logistics partner. Throughout this exchange, Beverly stood near the catering table, gripping her cold glass of water so tightly that her knuckles turned white, unable to contribute a single meaningful sentence. Julian attempted to initiate the formal slide presentation, motioning for Beverly to deliver her prepared opening remarks. Beverly stepped forward to the podium, her voice tight, dry, and unnatural as she began reciting her memorized phonetic script. For the first 5 minutes, her delivery was barely tolerable, though her artificial cadence sounded robotic, awkward, and strained to native ears. She stumbled over slight variations in pitch, but managed to stagger through the intro slides. Then, 5 minutes into the presentation, Ms. Zhao raised her hand politely and asked a detailed, unscripted technical question in Mandarin regarding maritime insurance indemnity clauses under regional Asian shipping treaties. Beverly froze instantly at the podium. Her eyes darted around the room in absolute panic. She had no idea what Ms. Zhao had just asked, as maritime indemnity clauses were completely outside her memorized phonetic script. Beverly stood at the podium in agonizing silence for 10 full seconds, her face turning bright red as visible beads of sweat broke out along her forehead. She stammered in broken English, asking Ms. Zhao to repeat the statement. Ms. Zhao repeated the technical question in Mandarin, speaking slower and pointing directly to a specific regulatory clause in the draft contract. Beverly looked desperately toward me, silently pleading for assistance with terrified eyes. I remained completely silent at the table, taking a slow, calm sip of green tea. Beverly then attempted to guess the meaning of the words, uttering a series of jumbled, grammatically absurd Chinese words that translated roughly into saying that ocean cargo ships were friendly flying birds that laid eggs in the harbor. Mr. Lin frowned deeply, his expression transforming from polite interest to stern disappointment. He turned to Julian and asked in English why the company's designated lead negotiator was speaking nonsensical phrases during a formal commercial transaction. Julian looked as though he might collapse on the floor. Beverly, growing completely frantic, attempted to cover her embarrassment by raising her voice and claiming that my consulting firm had provided improper briefing materials. She pointed an accusing finger at me, screaming that I had deliberately sabotaged her presentation out of professional jealousy. I calmly stood up from my seat at the conference table, retrieved a sleek leather tablet from my briefcase, and connected it directly to the main boardroom display screen. I projected the full digital audit trail of our instructional sessions from the private consulting portal, along with the signed executive consulting agreement from 6 months prior. I presented the official documentation proving that Beverly had engaged in a systematic effort to fabricate her qualifications while attempting to utilize company resources without board authorization. Furthermore, I presented a comprehensive legal memorandum detailing how Beverly's attempt to force my termination constituted unlawful interference with contract under state tort law, as well as an unlawful effort to cause Apex Global Logistics to infringe upon my proprietary software under federal copyright statutes. I laid out every evidentiary document in pristine chronological order, leaving zero doubt in the minds of anyone present regarding who had built the international infrastructure and who had attempted to steal credit. I explained that the core trade matrix was my personal intellectual property, licensed only while I remained in executive authority. I systematically walked the board members and foreign delegates through the recorded video archives, pointing out how Beverly had explicitly acknowledged that she was faking her credentials for personal prestige. I highlighted that her unauthorized representation threatened not only the current $75 million contract, but exposed Apex Global Logistics to severe legal sanctions for breach of fiduciary duty and corporate fraud. Every executive in the room listened in spellbound silence as the overwhelming documentation laid bare the complete anatomy of the deception. I displayed time-stamped video evidence showing Beverly begging me to simplify Chinese vocabulary into English sounds, making it undeniable that her claims of linguistic fluency were entirely fraudulent. Mr. Lin stood up from his seat, straightened his formal jacket, and looked directly at Chief Executive Officer Julian Prescott. Mr. Lin stated in clear, forceful English that his industrial group had come to negotiate a $75 million partnership with serious, highly qualified international logistic professionals, not to participate in an amateur theatrical farce staged by an executive spouse. He declared that unless Beverly Prescott was immediately removed from all corporate affairs and the negotiations was placed entirely under my direct legal and operational authority, the Beijing delegation would terminate all discussions immediately and blackball Apex Global Logistics across the entire Asian commercial sector. Julian, pale and shaking, immediately signed an emergency executive order stripping Beverly of all corporate access, ordering uniformed security guards to escort her out of the building. As Beverly was led out of the conference hall in tears of utter humiliation and rage, screaming threats at the top of her lungs that echoed down the executive corridors, the room returned to quiet professional order. She attempted to kick the security guard's desk on her way out, but the guards firmly ushered her into the elevator, sealing her complete professional eviction from the corporate premises. For the next 3 hours, I led the intensive contract negotiations alongside Ms. Zhao and Mr. Lin. Utilizing my deep knowledge of maritime law, supply chain optimization, and trade agreements, I completely restructured the joint venture framework. I introduced strategic risk mitigation covenants, revised shipping route allocations, and established a direct regulatory liaison portal using my proprietary trade matrix. Recognizing the superior efficiency of my patented logistics algorithm, Mr. Lin expanded the scope of the partnership from $75 million to $95 million over a 5-year operational term, We finalized contract parameters, established tariff mitigation structures, and signed binding preliminary covenants before the afternoon session concluded. That evening, the Emergency Governance Committee of the Board of Directors convened an extraordinary late-night session. Upon reviewing the complete dossier, including the video recordings, the software licensing terms, the Warren Act liabilities, and the expanded $95 million contract execution, the board acted with ruthless corporate efficiency. They recognized that my leadership had not only saved the firm from catastrophic bankruptcy and public ruin, but had expanded the core enterprise value by $20 million. The board voted unanimously to issue a formal, written corporate apology to me, which was permanently recorded in the official company archives. They revoked Julian Prescott's discretionary executive authority over personnel decisions, placing the entire international division under an independent governance board. Furthermore, the board offered me an immediate promotion to Senior Vice President of Global Operations, accompanied by a comprehensive 5-year executive agreement with complete administrative autonomy. My new executive agreement included a substantial base salary increase, an expanded equity stake, complete operational autonomy over all international divisions, and an explicit contractual clause barring any executive family members from entering corporate facilities or interfering with staff. Furthermore, Apex Global Logistics executed a formal, high-value corporate licensing contract with my private holding firm, securing the ongoing operational rights to my patented trade algorithm under long-term licensing covenants. The emergency board meeting concluded late into the night, with the director signing off on every detail of the new corporate restructuring. The board chairman personally walked me to the elevator, thanking me for preserving the financial integrity of the company. I drove home through the quiet city streets, knowing that truth and legal mastery had triumphed over arrogance and nepotism. The board secretary immediately updated the corporate filings to reflect my elevated executive authority. Beverly's social and legal downfall was swift, public, and absolute. News of her disastrous presentation, fabricated qualifications, and public removal from the corporate headquarters by security guards spread rapidly through the city's executive and social circles. The elite country clubs, charity boards, and social foundations where she once paraded her unearned authority quietly removed her from their executive committees. Her reputation as a sophisticated international chairwoman was completely shattered across the business community. Local business journals even published discreet commentaries highlighting the perils of executive nepotism and fake credentials in global commerce. Furthermore, the board of directors initiated a formal forensic audit of her personal expenses, discovering that she had attempted to bill her private tutoring fees and personal luxury expenditures to the company's marketing accounts. Facing potential corporate litigation for dissipation of corporate assets, breach of fiduciary duty, and civil fraud, Beverly was forced to execute a formal legal settlement. Under the terms of the settlement, she surrendered her personal claims to corporate indemnification, paid full restitution to the company, and issued a signed written retraction of her false statements against me. Her legal team advised her that pursuing any counterclaims against me would result in federal fraud charges, forcing her to accept total defeat. 6 months after my promotion to Senior Vice President of Global Operations, the $95 million Asian Expansion Initiative achieved unprecedented corporate success. Operational throughput across our 58 corporate accounts increased by 40%, establishing Apex Global Logistics as a dominant force in international maritime trade. We opened regional operational nodes in major Asian ports and expanded our logistics framework across global markets, adding 12 new institutional clients to our roster and generating historic quarterly profits for our shareholders. Our quarterly earnings report was heralded by financial analysts as a masterclass in supply chain execution and strategic growth. My new executive suite occupied the entire top floor of the corporate headquarters, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the harbor and city skyline. Julian Prescott remained as chief executive officer in name, but his authority was strictly confined to domestic administrative oversight, In every major board meeting, shareholder summit, and international conference, it was understood by all parties that the true strategic leadership and operational power of the corporation resided in my office. Julian took to seeking my written approval before submitting major capital proposals to the board. Beverly Prescott never stepped foot inside the corporate building again. I occasionally heard through industry contacts that she had tried to register for executive Spanish classes under a pseudonym, hoping to reinvent herself once more in another social circle. But in the unforgiving realm of international commerce, pretense and entitlement can only survive until they collide with absolute legal competence, technical mastery, and unyielding truth. She found herself utterly isolated, as former acquaintances refused to invite her to elite social gatherings or acknowledge her presence at public charity events. In addition to my corporate responsibilities, I expanded my private trade law scholarship foundation, allocating a portion of my executive bonuses to fund full academic grants for aspiring international law students. I frequently lectured at top law schools on intellectual property rights, maritime regulatory compliance, and corporate governance. Students often asked about the key to navigating high-stakes executive conflicts, and my answer remained unchanged. Build your career on deep technical competence, bulletproof legal protection, and unwavering ethical standards. Looking back on the entire ordeal, I reflected deeply on the fundamental lessons of corporate power, legal architecture, and personal integrity. Entitled individuals often confuse social status with genuine capability, believing that arrogance can substitute for hard work, linguistic mastery, and legal preparation. They assume that lower-ranking professionals can be crushed without consequence to satisfy a fleeting personal grudge or soothe a wounded ego. However, when you build your professional career on deep technical expertise, bulletproof legal protection, and unassailable personal integrity, you create a structural foundation that no entitled executive spouse can ever destroy. When reality finally asserts itself, those who rely on lies, vanity, and manipulation inevitably collapse under the weight of their own deception. Meanwhile, those who stand firmly on truth, legal mastery, and professional competence emerge stronger, higher, and completely victorious in the end. As I look out over the harbor from my executive desk, each evening, I am reminded that real executive authority is earned through competence and ethical dedication. No amount of social standing or corporate posturing can replace genuine expertise. Standing tall on a foundation of integrity, law, and hard work remains the ultimate blueprint for lasting success. Now, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone's corporate deception catch up with them in a dramatic way? Have you ever had to stand up against executive overreach in your career? Leave your story in the comments, hit the like button, and subscribe for more deep legal and corporate revenge stories.